So our final speaker for this evening, as we get the slides up, is Jeff Pullum of Edinburgh.
Ivan had a T-shirt made for me a few weeks ago. The slogan, I'll put it up there as well. This is how we think now, Ivan and me. It's characteristic of the man. Just had a T-shirt made for me and sent it as a gift in between surgeries and chemotherapy appointments. Always thinking of other people. I liked it a lot. I will wear it often. We're exact contemporaries, Ivan and me. 1976 PhDs, at least academically, we're contemporary. So we remember the GPSG period, during which, in 1984, Jim Higginbottom proposed an argument, he published in LI, that natural languages are not context-free. That would have been a relevant result at the time. And it depended crucially on such-that clauses that modify nouns, always having anaphoric pronouns referring back to the nouns. You know, the man such that he walks is sort of typical logician invented example. I recently just went through the Wall Street Journal looking for all the such that clauses, and only 3 of them are modifying nouns. Here they are. They're the usual cumbersome stuff. But all 3 of them are counterexamples. That's 100%. Think about that. Because Higginbottom was completely insensitive to proffered counterexamples at the time. I found one in Jespersen. He wouldn't listen. 100% of the cases in the Wall Street Journal do not comply. Here, as Carl said, appearing to change the subject, here's some judgments of Grant Goodall's from 1987 from his book. Right? Familiar stuff from the Sarg-Wasser-Weissler paper, Sarg-Gazdar-Wasser-Weissler paper of 1985, in fact. He's got a star on the bouncer was muscular and a guitarist. He's okay with either stupid or a liar. Both crazy and a genius seems all right. He puts a question mark on both crazy and a Republican, and a star on both crazy and an attorney. This is judgmental chaos. You know, you should be panicking about what exactly is supposed to be the basis for the facts in our subject. And let me just say one other thing. Philip Miller just had a paper sent back from a referee for a conference. Philip had shown with corpus examples that a certain well-known generalization by theoreticians was not true, and the response of the referee was, "I'm not convinced by the examples." What? Stuff is happening here. Something is happening here, and you don't know what it is. In W. Sidney Allen's inaugural lecture at Cambridge, I think they've got, I haven't got it up as a slide. Allen said, "The linguist's gospel comprises every word that proceeds from his informant's mouth, which cannot by definition be wrong. But as a matter of principle, whatever the informant volunteers about his language as opposed to in it must be assumed to be wrong." That's the extreme opposite of the intuition-based idea of where our data comes from. And it survives in popular culture. This is from an unknown commenter who can't write on a blog, not language log. We would have deleted it. If you're a descriptivist, this person is saying, and someone honestly makes a sentence, that's an honest sentence in the language that actually is. That's the W. Sidney Allen position. If it was said, it's fine. That's what I'm calling the everything is correct view of linguistics. There's also a nothing is relevant view. Arnolds wiki ran into it when he found on a newsgroup sci.lang years ago that possessive antecedents were just being claimed as ungrammatical. Zwicky mailed this person an example from his own writing, and he just said, "Well, I should be more vigilant." George Orwell does this kind of thing. Remember Politics in the English Language. Look back through this essay and for certain you will find that I have again and again committed the very faults I'm protesting at. Even if it's in his own work, the counterexamples mean nothing because in grammar nothing is relevant. What I'm suggesting here is that these attitudes of extreme descriptivism and extreme prescriptivism are sort of echoes of what's going on in theoretical linguistics as the battle between the corpus linguists and the unaided intuition peering into the glassy essence of your soul epistemology. And my talk is going to be about that topic. Would I say that linguistics should be restricted to working with corpora? That if that seemed to be implied by me mocking Grant Goodall's grammaticality judgments and Jim Higginbottom's stubbornness and complete inability to describe English, no, of course I wouldn't say we should be restricted to corpus linguistics. But the matter is kind of subtle. I want to give you a case study. There's a curious construction in which a concessive PP has a fronted predicative constituent. Things like happy though I am. And a question occurred to me about it. Is that an unbounded dependency or not? We had to settle that implicitly for describing it in the Cambridge Grammar. I looked in the Wall Street Journal corpus, which I keep on every laptop I have. It's just so convenient because it's plain text and I can use fgrep. Looking for the cases of though, and I had to do this the old-fashioned way. I had to read 1,000 examples, actually 1,003, because of 3 obvious typos that didn't involve though. These are the 4 cases I found in the first 1,000 occurrences of though, and none of them show an unbounded dependency. There's the key preposition phrases. Skilled though they are, modest though it may be, incredible though it may seem, the longest one, well-intentioned though they may have been, but that's non-finite catenative complement verbs strung together. There's no finite subordinate clause with a gap in it. So what I want to know is, would this sort of thing be grammatical? This is invented, well-intentioned though many people may have imagined that the CIA probably thought they were gap, their foreign policy operation. That's what I want to know. I put out a reward for any example of this general sort to the graduate student community at Santa Cruz years ago. A ridiculous reward, but nobody came through. About a year later, Chris Potts, bless him, came to me, didn't claim the financial reward, but he pointed out an example on page 13 of Gleick's biography of Feynman, which includes the phrase philosophical and unscientific, though he knew they were. Bing. Now that sort of settled it, but by Chris Potts's wide reading and just casual noticing, you have to have sharp eyes and read a lot of books. Could I have got that example and thus settled to my own satisfaction whether it's an unbounded dependency from using regular balanced corpora of the published kind? I thought not at the time, but I was wrong. Mark Davies pointed out to me, he's the guy who developed COCA, straight after I gave a talk on this in 2009, that using this search pattern in COCA, and what that means is look for an adjective followed by though, followed by a personal pronoun, followed by a verb, followed by a personal pronoun, followed by an instance of the copula. He immediately came up with this. Weirdly, it's from Joseph Epstein, one of Chris Potts's favorite authors. He's often pointed out to me nice instances of style in Joseph Epstein's writing. There it is, good though he knew it was. There was a case in COCA, and it could be found if you knew the right kind of pattern to use, because you might get a hit if you were lucky. Maybe this sort of thing could be done. I was prepared to say that this construction is too rare for us to trust corpora, but maybe not. It's finely balanced. What should be the epistemology for syntax if we're going to be serious? We really can't continue to go on bouncing between, or else deciding between and settling into one or the other, of the sort of thing that happens in corpus linguistics conferences in Europe, where people are doing very, very dull work that's entirely corpus limited and telling you what the percentages are, and that's their paper. And the kind of stuff that Barbara Scholes used to call head-tilting linguistics. The sort of, I think I can get that. But both of these are stupid. What I think is the right epistemology we should be thinking about is suggested abstractly in Nelson Goodman's Fact, Fiction and Forecast, which actually dates back to the early 1950s. He was thinking about induction. He's saying principles of deductive inference are justified by their conformity with accepted deductive practice, and that's how we ought to go. Their validity depends on accordance with the particular deductive inference we actually make and sanction. If a rule yields unacceptable inferences, we drop it as invalid. Justification of general rules thus describes from judgments rejecting or accepting particular deductive inferences. You get the general rules from the particular ones. Now he says, notice that deductive inferences are justified by the fact that the rules allow them, and general rules are justified by their conformity to valid inferences, and that's circular. But he says, this circle is a virtuous one. The point is that rules and particular inferences alike are justified by being brought into agreement with each other. And then in italics, and it's his italics, a lovely piece of writing, a rule is amended if it yields an inference we are unwilling to accept. An inference is rejected if it violates a rule we are unwilling to amend. That is a hint of how we should be working. John Rawls picked this up and called it reflective equilibrium. The term seems to come from Rawls, and applied it to moral philosophy. And I don't think any linguist has noticed that after discussing it in moral philosophy, this principle that you can settle on what the rules are and what the judgments they're meant to be accounting for are simultaneously by trying to bring them into optimal alignment. Don't think anyone has noticed in linguistics that Rawls then made a comment about grammar. While we may not expect a substantial revision of our sense of correct grammar in view of a linguistic theory, the principles of which seem especially natural to us, such a change is not inconceivable, and no doubt our sense of grammaticalness may be affected to some degree anyway by this knowledge. Right. That's how we work, and I don't think this is bad. In multiple center embedding, it's not until we have some idea of what we would like the rule system to be, like phrase structure assigning active sentences and passives being derived from or something, that we can really decide what we want to say should be our judgment about multiple center embedding cases. When I talked about this in a reply to Jeffrey Sampson, who has become a defender of the extreme Sidney Allen position that you just do computations on the corpus and that's linguistics and nothing that isn't in the corpus counts, I remarked that I take linguistics to have normative subject matter. The task of the syntactician is an exact codification of a set of norms implicit in a linguistic practice. So we're much closer to being like logic and moral philosophy than you might have thought. And Sampson responded as if I had fired a pistol or something. He was appalled. He says I was proposing a view of grammatical research that departs further than mine from the consensus, etc., etc. He says correctness is not a concept applicable to the domains of ethics or aesthetics. At least I was assuming that there is a truth value to statements of a grammar, he's basically saying. And then he accuses me of actually contradicting myself because I mention that how linguists have also got to become acquainted with ways of mathematicizing their subject matter. He calls this blithely ignoring the conflict between that recommendation and the appeal to treat linguistics as a discipline concerned with norms. I don't think there's any conflict here at all. What I actually said about linguistics is that it's not a happy state for us to be unable to agree on whether essentially all strings of words are grammatical, which is his view, or essentially none are, which actually is the way it comes out if you do some serious counting of what we would regard how many strings of length n we would regard as grammatical. He complains that I'm opening up far too wide a range of methodological ideas. I don't think it's such a huge range, and I don't think it's got any lack of sensibleness. Grammars are sets of statements about structural properties. If an expression has the right properties, it's well formed according to that grammar. If it lacks the key properties, it isn't. A grammar may be inaccurate. The descriptive grammarian aims to write a grammar that is accurate. And we trust that under ideal circumstances, short and simple sentences will often be judged grammatical if they are well formed. And accurate transcriptions of what people have said will be composed mainly of sentences that are well formed. But all of these are sort of tentative and subject to falsification in particular cases. There are a whole lot of parallels between the domains of syntax and morality. Usage advice of the prescriptive kind corresponds to casuistry. Universal grammar is analogous to meta-ethics, and so forth. A corpus is like some raw records of what people actually did, and I suppose descriptive grammar is like the anthropology of moral systems. So we can say our epistemology is something like this, and this is just adapting Goodman. Grammatical constraints are justified by their conformity with accepted usage. Their validity depends on accordance with the particular judgments of grammaticality we actually make and sanction. If a rule yields unacceptable consequence, we drop it. Justification of general constraints derives from particular judgments. A general constraint is amended if it yields a consequence about grammaticality that we're unwilling to accept. A particular judgment of grammaticality is rejected if it's incompatible with a general constraint we don't want to amend. And all of this continues to have real importance to us. If it sounds just like anodyne statements of what we all think anyway, it's still a real part of our lives. My most recently completed paper, which John Payne is a major co-author, by John Payne, me, Barbara Scholes, and Eva Berlager, is about some judgments of C.L. Baker's from 35 years ago. This famous judgment that the student of chemistry was better prepared than the one of physics is ungrammatical, and that there's a huge problem. How could the child learn such a constraint, and so on. There's been 35 years of work on arguments from poverty, the stimulus about this. Payne and Berlager did a massive corpus work and found this is overwhelmingly refuted by what occurs in the corpora. Not that this particular sentence does, but of phrases occur with anaphoric one all over the place. They've got hundreds of examples. And we've got a semantic analysis to account for all this, and so on. The paper has finally been accepted by language, but let me just admit to you that it was rejected for presentation at the LSA 2 years running by referees who said, I don't think I can get that. It may have been attested, but I don't find the examples convincing. It's not good for me. And we've got to break away from that. I've suggested how we could do it without turning into W. Sidney Allen and thinking that we just have to mimic the corpus in everything we do. The interplay, the reflective equilibrium view of how linguistics should work is the right one, it seems to me. And if it just seems ordinary to you, like you're doing that already, I think it's just because it's like what decent syntacticians like Ivan are doing all along. Thanks.
What do we do when we don't agree about which rules we're willing to amend?
There'll be negotiation. This won't be easy. I mean, as Maurice Halley once said when asked by a skeptic about generative phonology, but how do you discover what the underlying representations are? Halley said, you get up early and you work like hell. This won't be easy any more than it was easy for Goodman to flesh out how we might do reliable inductive inference and have some justificatory principles that were of reasonable value to generalize over how we do this. It has to be done. It's not going to be an automatic thing that you know which constraint to drop. There will still be these back and forths, these complicated arguments about it that you were participating in, that Ted Gibson was, Sprouse and Sugg and Hofmeister and so on. That will go on. What I hope won't go on, though, is a kind of association of the positions involved with cultures and even locations. It seems to me unpleasantly close to being true that if you live in Cambridge, Massachusetts or College Park, Maryland, you have to take one view. And if you live in Palo Alto or other sensible places like Edinburgh, you have to take the other view. We shouldn't be like that. We should be able to take either view. I wish these positions would separate themselves from the sociological clusters. But maybe I'm just being too idealistic, naive, when after all, I'm an old guy and I know how cynical we really ought to be. So it won't be his age.